welcome to Michael Page Technologies Leadership Interview Series. My name is James Barrett. I'm the Regional Director for Michael Page's Technology Business for the UK. And for this interview series, we'll be speaking to a range of transformation leaders from a variety of different backgrounds and domains in order to take their learns from 2020 to help the wider leadership community on how to make their decisions for 2022 and help organisations to plan and improve from what was a very difficult year. Why have we set this up? Well, the leadership role, as we know, can be a pretty lonely place, and therefore being able to share leaders' insights, mistakes and pain points and learns is a key way to be able to add value to the community. So today we have Nigel Kirkland. Now, Nigel I've known for a long time. He's held a range of senior leadership positions across a number of different industries, including energy and education and even recruitment for his sins. But Nigel, it's great to see you again. Can you give us a bit of insight to who you are and what you bring to the table?
Yeah, great. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, James. So I'm Nigel Kirkland. My professional career started out in management consulting with a couple of the big four consultancy firms, but I've been out in industry now for the best part of a decade. And as you mentioned, I've been in a number of roles from recruitment through retail, manufacturing, utilities. I'm pretty much prepared to give anything a go, as long as it's interesting and challenging. And I think this last couple of years has been challenging for a number of reasons, and I think it's been a great and exciting time to be involved in technology. And so happy to be here today to talk about it.
Lovely, thank you. Well, if you've tried recruitment, then everything else pales into insignificance, from my humble opinion. But so you mentioned last year, and I think clearly a difficult year for all. But where there's adversity, there's a chance to learn and grow, and I think that's a good place for us to start. So, from your perspective, as you both in your own role and also in the community that you work in, what would you say were your key learns from 2020?
I think it's been fascinating, James, and I think for me especially, it's been really interesting because I've had two roles in that period. So obviously now I'm the group CIO of an education business, but at the start of the pandemic, I was the global CIO of a risk consultancy business, and so what's been fascinating is two relatively unconnected businesses, really, but experience some very similar things. And quite possibly the biggest learning that I've seen in both of those businesses together is the way in which decision making can be altered, and the role of governance can be really honed and refined when the situation demands it. And so some of those previous tenets that traditional industries had for a long time around the role of decision making, the role of governance, and we've all been part of those things where huge governance committees and charters are written. I think last year in two very different businesses demonstrated that the need for agility and the need for fast decision making to support that agility is critical to organizational success.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and it was a case of needs must, really, wasn't it? There was no other choice, and it showed how much governance we'd been carrying in organisations potentially unnecessarily for a period of time.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think it also brought to the forefront some of the things that, from a technology practice point of view, we do, and we almost nod to it, but don't really do it properly or think it through. So everybody's been who's been involved in technology knows about BCP and disaster recovery. But how many times have you actually been involved in the situations where that business continuity really comes to the fore, and in such a quick way? Yeah. Certainly in March of last year, a lot of businesses, I think, were sensing that this was something different, and therefore we had to respond in a different way, and that in itself was an important learning. But I think the scale and then the longevity of what's occurred will have taken most people by surprise. I don't think even going into the incident, people realised quite what it was going to be like and for how long.
I mean, from your own perspective, what did you find out about yourself when you were going through this? Was it, as you say, falling back on skills that you had but maybe hadn't used, or did you discover new ways of working or new approaches which helped you succeed and thrive through it?
I think all of that. I think you have to learn, and we have to see ourselves as continual learners, and lifelong learners. Otherwise, you can't survive in the technology profession. I don't believe. But I think a lot of it is again, you do fall back on the hard yards that you've done. You do fall back on some of those skills that you do know how to do, because I think the other leaders that I spoke to at the time, we were all saying the same thing. For years we'd strived to be in a position to be heard. We were then grateful to be in the roles that we were, where we were heard, and we were involved in the real strategic conversation about the business and its future. And then all of a sudden we were pretty much to a person thrust into the limelight of being the person that everybody wanted to hear from in all aspects, all at the same time. And so I think that was certainly with the cohort that I spoke to was unusual for some and more usual for others. But it did require different conversation, because we weren't talking about roadmaps, we weren't talking about strategy, we weren't reflecting on the 3-year plans that we'd got. All of those things in a multifaceted way were all pivoting almost overnight. Areas of the business that had previously been really successful became less successful. Other areas of the business that may have been either in infancy or in decline were suddenly in boom, and that just changed the dynamics of all of those conversations. So I think the people who survived it well had done the hard yards and knew the subject matter well, but were able to very quickly, again, like the businesses, pivot and apply it in new ways and to the new and emerging situations and scenarios. And so that, I think, was fairly critical, and probably shows that the people with experience found it a little bit easier than the people who were thrust into relatively new roles.
Yeah, no, I know. I think it's an interesting point, and you work as an interim, predominantly, and I think there'll be an interesting challenge for a lot of organisations, lots of boards who maybe feel that they haven't either taken advantage of the opportunity that the last year faced, or equally the challenges and overcome it, and how they overcome it, in terms of them going out to be able to assess how to find the right potential interim to take them to the next kind of journey. What kind of questions do you think an HRD or a managing director, maybe a mid-tier firm, one that isn't necessarily that experienced in this kind of digital space, what should they be asking to make sure they get the right kind of interim to help them through the next stage of their journey?
A great question, I think, James, and not the easiest one to answer. But I think it's the people who can think more broadly around the subject, who can inspire. I think true leadership has become more important in this space than ever. It isn't about having innovation and creativity from one person. We all want to uncover the genius and the visionary, but I think more than ever it's about the leadership and bringing the team together and harnessing the value of the team. It's about encouraging teams to perform at higher levels and to respond to the challenge, and being able to inspire them to do so. I think it's about, to me, that one of the great things that I saw, and certainly around me and the teams that I was responsible for at the time, was the way that they came alive because of the challenge. And so it wasn't, again, a small cohort trying to solve the problem or trying to work out, how we supported a new division or a different product line. Everybody saw it as an exciting opportunity, and I think that mindset has become more important than ever. And again, those are the things that I think potential recruiters and people in those decision-making positions should look for. It's the mindset, it's the positivity, it's the ability to see opportunity rather than threat, and to embrace weakness as areas for improvement rather than to be worried about and try and conceal weakness. That they are the opportunities. And I think that optimistic outlook, combined with inspirational leadership, is is the things that people need to look for alongside, depth of technical skill, experience, and understanding multiple models. Because obviously most businesses have gone through fairly significant change.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because in the face of adversity, teams react in one of two ways to polarize it. But if you've got a team that comes together and looks to solve the problem, that's great. But there will then be fatigue, won't there? So that inspirational leadership to take them through the next phases as it becomes, what is it? It becomes BAU essentially. Change becomes BAU in this current environment. So therefore, the leader's the one who's got to steer that through.
And I think it's about the here and now combined with the near-term view, combined with what's probably a relatively new middle-term view. So
Yes.
you do need the strategists. You need the person who isn't just making short-term, in-the-moment decisions and then ready to react to the next one. You kind of want that proactivity. So how quickly can you realign to a new strategy? And that becomes about not just your products and services that you're responsible for supporting or building, but your mindset. How can you encourage the team to think differently, to be able to pivot quickly, change direction, and do things in a slightly different way, building block style, and also accept that I thought it was a great time and continues to be a great time for innovation.
Yeah.
Because now people are prepared to have a greater tolerance for trying, failing, but learning from it and trying again.
Yeah.
Than possibly before. So I think I personally think this has created a great melting pot.
Yeah.
To be different, to do differently.
Yeah, I agree. I feel sorry for all the finance directors out there. I don't know if I can say that out loud, but in terms of how they look at their forecasting and budgeting when they were already often challenged, if they worked in a legacy mindset and model, to be able to work in an agile way, and now you've actually got the whole world has turned into, if you want to be successful, you probably need to fail fast, learn fast, and you've got a finance director looking for a 3-year plan. I mean, I think you just that world is gone, hasn't it, for a period of time at least?
It has, but I think whilst it's a tough time for finance directors and CFOs, it's been a tough time for all execs, because they're all trying to lead an organisation through I dislike using unprecedented because it's been overused.
That's bingo.
But certainly a very challenging set of circumstances. But I also think, again, there's an opportunity there to recognise that legacy genuinely is a problem.
Yeah.
Technical debt is a real thing that causes real problems.
Yeah.
And I think some of those conversations that have been hard for the CFOs and the FDs to have with the board or with the stakeholders around financing became a lot easier because some of those issues they've talked about for a long time crystallized.
Yeah.
And became obvious. Businesses couldn't adjust and change direction as quickly as they wanted to because of the constraints of those legacy systems.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, I think this will serve as a warning of the perils of ignoring those kind of things, which in due course should wash through and make life easier for all of those execs that are battling for change.
Yeah. Well, I think it stopped being theory and started being a real life case study, didn't it? In terms of, this is how you need to react quickly, and it comes back to that governance versus pragmatism versus getting stuff done. And I think the technical debt's an interesting one, isn't it? Because nobody set out X number of years ago to build up all this technical debt, apart from maybe people who are selling the technology. But if you then look at going forward, there are going to be other blind spots which we have in the industry, which leaders like yourself, like on the other boards, are going to have. What risks do you think that whether it is business stakeholders or technology leaders, what do you think they need to be aware of? Because there could be a very well-intentioned rush to work in a far more kind of agile way, to work on outcomes on much shorter, even kind of business level, enterprise level sprints. What's the risk that people need to be aware of, do you think? What could we be missing?
To me, this is where the technical bit collides with the business world, and the reality is it isn't about the applications. it's about how we get access to data.
Yeah.
I had many conversations with sales directors and with commercial directors who were intuitively aware of what was happening, intuitively aware of where the market was moving, intuitively knew what they wanted to do, just couldn't get to the data to prove it.
Yeah.
And so in some ways we were operating in a world where people were prepared to back hunches better. But I don't think that bit pervades for long.
Yeah.
Eventually we all go back to wanting facts and data. And so I think the sort of the big learning for every organization has got to be to keep an eye on the legacy systems, but more importantly, the legacy impact on data and the ability to get to meaningful data, blend it with new data to quickly enable you to support new decision making. And I think whether that's in sales, it's in marketing, it's in operations, it's across the board throughout the supply chain.
Yeah.
Most of those issues came about not because of the challenges with the underlying technology or application level, but
Yeah.
with the access to the data to provide meaningful insight.
Yeah, and I think that we're seeing that from the recruitment side. There was already a deficiency of data skills and talent at the necessary level in the market beforehand, and that's just gone. That deficit's increasing, and we've really got to look at how we address that in an early careers perspective, because we're just building up a skills debt, as it were, a talent debt for the future.
Well, I think we are, and it's a topic we'll no doubt discuss in greater detail. But this is where you come back to the whole concept of what is digital, um, and in a lot of industries, I think it's been misused and misunderstood.
Yeah.
I think 2020 brought a lot of that into the spotlight. People thought they had good in-house digital skills and digital capabilities without really understanding what that meant and what they really needed.
Yeah.
And then the number of businesses that all of a sudden uh, weren't operating in the same physical world and became a much more online world started to really crystallize, I think, that the need for those skill sets that people possibly had misunderstood.
Yeah.
But that's the bit I don't see going away, James. I'm a technologist. I'm an evangelist for the use of technology, and I've found it difficult at times during the last 12 months because I can't get in a room with a whiteboard
Yeah.
and draw pictures to help explain things, whether that's to my own team, to customers, or to my fellow board members. It's those kind of challenges that even as a tech evangelist, you've got to be open and honest and go, yeah, I'm not fully there yet.
Yeah.
And how do I adopt new ways of working, because this is going to become more the norm, not necessarily driven by either an employee desire or by a business's desire to change its footprint, or by customers wanting to interact in a different way,
Yeah.
but by all of those things blended together in ratios which we don't yet understand, and we
Yeah.
can't possibly predict how those things will melt together, but they will, and we have to be ready. And so there is a tech point to this, but
Yeah.
there's also a mindset again and a ways of working thing that we've got to all get round, that sort of says, how do we harness the power of the components into something greater?
So given the fact that we know the world has changed, we know that both, the world of business, leadership in business, need to work out how best to approach this, but no one really has the answers yet. The technology needs to keep advancing to solve the problems of business and of society, but often technology will want to solve their own problems as well. So we know we've got that as a challenge. Now, is it time for us to drop the digital from digital transformation?
I'd be delighted if we did, James. I've always, I think a lot of businesses struggle to understand what transformation is,
Yeah.
as opposed to change or incremental, evolution.
Yeah.
I think adding the D word
Yeah.
only made it even more complex and confusing for people.
Yeah.
I don't see any value in having a conversation about digital in that context. I think we can talk about what is online and offline in sales channels and in marketing channels and such like that, and it adds value and real context to the conversation. I think digital and transformation only muddy the waters. It's when we do talk about transformation and transformation programs. I often would say to fellow board members, it's if I'm running big transformation problems, a third of it is the technology. The other is about the people and the culture, and that's what this should teach all of us. Technology, of course, it's important, and automation means that it will become more important. It's an incredibly important component in our daily lives, in the daily lives of businesses, and in the transformation of those businesses, and as they grow into new organizations in new markets. Incredibly important. Still not as important as the people.
Indeed, and that leads us nicely on, almost as if I'd planned it and I hadn't for this one. So, so if one of the challenges that we faced is a lack of inclusive thinking in terms of, there's been people sitting with proprietary information in their heads, and that's been to further their own ends, their own careers, their own kind of, I guess, their own sales potentially. One of the things that clearly technology has been working on for a number of years, to varying levels of success, but a long way to go still, is around being more diverse in terms of the individuals, more diverse in terms of the groups, the thinking, and bring it together, and then the inclusive solutions. And I guess one of the concerns that I've heard from clients and candidates is, when we are under pressure, when an organization is under pressure, it is very easy to focus on what the problem is and what the outcome is, which might be to survive for many organizations, for many teams in this kind of time, or these recent times. And something like diversity inclusion, which should be central, tends to fall away, and there's a risk of it falling away as a bolt-on rather than being the core of the opportunity, core of the challenge. So I was just interested, from your experience of working in so many different kind of businesses and the technology arena, we know D&I is critical. What advice have you got for leaders, whether that's business, technology, or somewhere in between, who may feel that it is dropping away in their organization? How have you managed to keep it front and center when you've been driving these big transformation agendas?
I think it's as is often the case, we know the answer, and I'm delighted you've already told me the answer in your question. We are still trying to solve problems, and what is the best way to solve a problem? Is it to get 8 identical thinkers who all try and think and act and behave the same way? That probably limits the solutions you're going to come up with. This is absolutely about solving problems, and it's absolutely about having different viewpoints and different understandings of that situation in order to move it forward. So, in a way that you described the problem, you described the solution. It's why D&I is even more important, because we've got to get greater variation and breadth to thinking, different perspectives, and if we don't, our chances of solving these problems become very linear. So I think it's one of those that the problem itself provides its own solution, and where we don't, I think the bigger challenge there is giving it the time to think about what we're trying to solve, rather than leaping straight to solutioning. Which is the age-old problem, and that is why it is a challenge in the IT professions and in a lot of businesses, because there is always a rush to solution. Whereas what the journey to solution is more often where the value is, and I think that's another key component of this. We tend to think in terms of the cost of doing these kind of activities. When we talk about the value that it brings, I think it becomes much easier to get it onto the corporate agenda and to keep it on the corporate agenda, because it contributes to those value streams in the business in so many more ways than just how do we do this thing.
Organizations looking to move from legacy to product, to even to kind of a platform model. We're seeing more and more organizations looking at those digitally native firms and those that have moved through the product kind of maturity scale and look at it with envy, thinking that's the answer to everything. What's your kind of insight into which organizations might want to consider that? What are the risks of doing it? The reasons to, the reasons not, potentially.
Great question, and as you say, you and I have discussed these things previously. I think it's about understanding your industry and understanding where you are in your industry, and trying to understand as a business whether you're following the market or whether you're trying to make the market. I think it's about understanding your core competencies, both as a business and the capabilities you have within the business. But I think we can all see the threat of not starting to think differently, and the threat of more agile businesses. And 15, 20 years ago, we'd have been talking about smaller startup businesses. Those smaller startup businesses are now, the behemoths in most industries.
Yeah.
So it's not about the size anymore. It's about the agility.
Yeah.
It's about the speed of decision making. It's about the speed to then be able to put that into play. And so where you are, legacy is absolutely fine in areas of your business that don't hurt you.
Yeah.
There are areas of business that, as long as they maintain regulatory compliance, and are maintainable, then that's absolutely fine. You don't see power stations trying to change all the telemetry inside power stations on a yearly or 5-yearly cycle.
Probably a good thing. Yeah.
Probably a good thing. So it's about being able to recognise which bits of the business need to be in which phase, which are in that first horizon of what we do now, what's in the it's going to change and it's going to make things better, and then what's the further horizon of what makes us a great business in the future.
Yeah.
And then aligning your development to that, so that there isn't an answer of get out of legacy and into product, or get out of product into platform. It's about recognizing the benefits and threats of each of those positions on each of the businesses areas of competency, and its core components. And if you can break it down into those areas, which is very, very little difference to what we've always thought as businessmen, around knowing what makes your business special. How do you differentiate? Marketeers will tell us it's about knowing your USP. Some of this stuff we already know.
Yeah.
It's just coming in a different form. And as long as we think about it the right way, I think there's a trodden path through it. But I also think it points to ambition.
Yeah. And I think it's the same. We talked about it earlier. I'm just as we've been talking about it. Will go into a product-centric environment or a platform model be the next digital transformation that gets things signed off as boards panic after the last 12 months? Again, it comes down to looking at what you want to achieve, what the risks are, what the opportunities, and doing it for the right outcome, not just because there's a shiny business beside you doing it.
And understanding, where your employees want to be, and how they observe the business and the world, where your customers need you to be in order to support their models. But I think a lot of it does play to those. You need to be working with and alongside ambitious and visionary CEOs and CFOs and managing directors who can see the opportunity that all of these things present. And that's typically reflective of the stakeholders, whether that's in private business or family owned, or through to listed, quoted, PLCs. Understanding what people are trying to achieve is the most important thing, and getting that goal congruence throughout the organization, because that's what will really help you to understand where you pivot from products, which may be a very successful place to be, to do we want to be the content owner, or actually do we want to be the platform that allows content from many different sources to pass through,
flow through, yeah.
And creates a community? I'm now working, and I'm very happy to be involved in education tech, which is fascinating to understand how it works, and it's great to be part of something that's about bringing disparate sources of information together for the betterment of learners worldwide. And so for me, it's a great model to look at for how you think about where you want to be and how you want to play a part in that industry. But it's worlds apart from maybe utilities,
Yeah.
where, especially if you're in the infrastructure side of utilities, decisions are being made over building power stations or large infrastructure projects which have to be thought through over a 30-year period.
Yeah.
So I think the context is all important, but I think, again, we've come full circle. Last year taught us that legacy is bad if legacy impacts your ability to access decision-making information, and that data becomes the lifeblood again.
100%. And one last question for me, which I'm asking all the guests. So for our next episode, what would be a question that you'd like to pose to your leadership peer community? What would you like me to ask the next individual, the next group of people?
I suppose the big question for me is: do we believe as a group we're actually doing enough to drive the business agenda? Are we still being too responsive and reactive? Are we still waiting to be invited to participate and to think about the future of business? I personally believe that technology strategy and business strategy is more intertwined than ever. I used to talk to a lot of colleagues who would talk about aligning the IT strategy to the business strategy. I think those days are gone.
Yeah.
The technology strategy and the broader business strategy, they aren't one. They're not the same thing, but they do need to have a symbiotic relationship with each other, rather than one following the other. And I'd be really interested in whether my peers and colleagues around other businesses feel we're doing enough to really drive that, or whether we're still waiting to be asked.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and one when we have more time we can explore. The CIO is the next CEO, but we'll need another hour for that one.
I'll look forward to it, James.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you, Nigel. It's been a pleasure as ever, and been very informative. That's been some great insight, and I think really helpful to leaders out there and organisations who are looking to transform. So, look, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure, James.
If you found this video helpful for your recruitment journey, why not subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to tap the bell to get the latest videos first.